Of all the action-adventure games I've ever played, very few have focused as much on the adventure and as little on the action as Uncharted 4. It's a crying shame because what little combat Uncharted 4 contains is quite literally outstanding in its field, while the adventuring has only seen minor improvement over the meaningless climbing of Uncharted's 1 through 3. For anyone new to the channel, I've done videos on the previous 3 Uncharted games which I'll be referring back to during this one. Watching those isn't necessary to follow along here. Instead, if anything I say about the previous games intrigues you, those videos go into great detail and are there to be watched at your leisure. It seems only right to pass Uncharted 4 through the same lens as my Uncharted 1 and 2 video. To recap, the distinct parts of the Uncharted formula are combat, third-person shooting with some melee sprinkled in, climbing, traversing an environment. Uncharted 4 adds a handful of new ways to traverse, so I'm going to relabel this to exploration. Puzzles, which are the least common element of the Uncharted games, the ones in Uncharted 4 actually merit some discussion. And story, both cutscenes and moments of extended walking and talking. Last time I started with the most common gameplay style. In Uncharted 1 and 2 this was combat, but in Uncharted 4 this is instead climbing, or as I said, exploration. Uncharted 4 adds several new elements to the traversal of environments: the grapple hook, the piton, and the gravel or mudslides. All these new elements have one thing in common: they require some degree of skill in timing a button press. You have to time a jump off the grapple at the apex of the swing. You have to time a jump off the bottom of a mudslide so you don't fall to your death. And you have to time jamming the piton into a porous wall to give yourself a handhold. None of these require tight timing. You've got a pretty silly amount of time to jam the piton in, and you can actually be starting to swing backwards and still succeed at jumping off the grapple, but this is something I've been wanting to see from Uncharted since the very beginning. Instead of requiring no skill whatsoever, like the standard climbing, and making it look treacherous, the Uncharted games should have been requiring a small amount of skill, like with these timing challenges, and making that look much more difficult and impressive than it is. It would still be too easy to be my kind of game, but it would create the feeling that, in some small way, I did that. I saved Drake from falling to his death, or swung him over a pit. It wasn't hard to do, but there was at least something at stake. There was a way to fail. As I discussed in the first Uncharted video, during the vast majority of climbing sections in the previous games, there was no way to fail. Sometimes the games would test timing in a similar way, and those moments felt great, but they were few and far between. The addition of the 3 new traversal elements allows the designers to integrate timing challenges more often with a universal set of tools. Even the meaningless climbing segments show some improvement from time to time. There are some obvious examples of this in Scotland, using the gravel slides to get to some handholds in the middle, but this extends as far as just jumping towards the correct side of a gravel slide, or dropping the grapple hook over the right side of an outcropping. These are small additions which still don't go anywhere near far enough for my taste, but again, it is something. There is a way to fail. I'd say too many of these rely on just putting the handholds in an obscured location, like behind you or away from where the visual design is clearly guiding you, but these ones which show you the way forward and then require some thought to progress show an improvement, and are as far as you could expect the incredibly simplistic climbing mechanics to go. So it brings me no joy to have to repeat that these improvements still weren't enough to grab me. Only in the very last climbing section in the entire game is the player challenged with stringing multiple timing challenges together. The game ends minutes afterwards. I have to laugh because otherwise I'd cry. Again, I think of Prince of Persia 2008. Within the first hour of that game, you're already inputting more complex strings of buttons than you ever do in Uncharted 4. But if Uncharted had done this from the beginning, I would have at least got it, you know? I'd still recognise how simple everything was, but I'd be able to appreciate how the game takes these simple challenges and makes them look like incredible feats of timing and dexterity. For the first 3 games, we were instead given a task, completely absent of challenge, and then that was made to look like the incredible feat. The improvements aren't enough to make Uncharted 4 a good game in my eyes, but they do make it a much better one. A timing challenge is an infinite amount more enjoyable to me than no challenge at all. Of course, these improvements aren't universal. There's still too much goddamn climbing. Even the puzzle-style scenarios I mentioned aren't enough to alleviate just how much boring climbing, empty of any challenge whatsoever, you'll do in Uncharted 4. There are significantly fewer of these sections per hour of gameplay, but they pile up because Uncharted 4 is nearly twice as long as any previous Uncharted. In fact, all up, there's probably more of it than ever. It's a damn shame, because with all these improvements and new elements, Uncharted 4 really didn't need these sections anymore. They should have been made into very short connecting elements between rope swings, slides, pitoning, and those little traversal puzzles. Off the top of my head, this would mean chapters 1, 5, and 13 could be removed almost entirely. I want to clarify a stance one last time before moving on. I hate these sections because they are somewhat mechanically complex and input intensive, but cannot be failed. I don't mind walking sections because they're incredibly mechanically and input simple, and give you something to do with your hands as a story unfolds. I have absolutely no beef with walking simulators. They're a way to tell a slightly interactive story without worrying about rule sets and mechanics. It can be beneficial to let an audience progress a story at their own pace. The moment you introduce mechanics and complexity into those interactions, however, the moment you make it a game, I expect that game to be the focus, and I expect it to be good. I think climbing in Uncharted crosses that line. It's complex enough to be called a mechanic, and should be judged as one, and for reasons I've gone over in the past, it's a totally, utterly boring one. Sequels are a tricky thing, but if you ask me, Uncharted 4 is worse off for sticking to tradition, where expanding on some of the new ideas would have made for a better game. So that's climbing in Uncharted 4, but it's not the end of exploration. This time around, some open areas have been added for the player to explore in a vehicle. When I first heard about these, I assumed they were just going to be useless expanses which the artists had built while sitting on their hands waiting for the story to be refilmed. But Naughty Dog seem to have realised that there's no point in open areas if there's nothing interesting to find in them. The useless treasures of the previous games return, but this time around the real treasures are the snippets of clever gameplay which lead up to finding those treasures. These range from something as simple as using the roof of the boat as a platform to using the winch to pull down a beam. In The Last of Us, collectibles were scattered all over the place, not requiring any skill to obtain, but contributing to combat. In Uncharted 4, the collectibles contribute nothing, but require some thought to reach. In The Last of Us, you came for the collectible and stayed for the environmental design. In Uncharted 4, you come for the gameplay and stay for the collectible. Again, these situations are still very simple, but totally unique gameplay scenarios that aren't seen anywhere else are a great reward for players who decide to explore. Particular praise goes to the winch. In any other game, this long, thin cord would just clip through everything. And I admit, when I first saw it wrap convincingly around a tree trunk, I was impressed, but also expecting the accuracy of the hitboxes to be impressive technology for the sake of impressive technology. I had to eat my words when I got down this well and was presented with a simple but clever problem-solving scenario, getting the winch to reach far enough to pull a beam down. The fact that Naughty Dog could take an impressive feat of their technology and then actually manage to apply it to a gameplay scenario rather than just using it to make a set piece look prettier or something was quite the pleasant surprise. The Madagascar section is even designed so that most players will miss one of two combat arenas on their first playthrough. These arenas are small, but for what they are, they're as well designed as the rest of them. But I get ahead of myself. It's hard to hold it against a developer when they want every player to see every little bit of their hard work, so it shows remarkable restraint for an Uncharted game, of all the most linear things, to let the player genuinely discover some substantial bits and pieces on their own. A shame it took a series called Uncharted 4 games to get there. One thing the series has well and truly charted is totally mediocre third-person shooting, and I'm happy to say this is one tradition A Thief's End leaves behind. The level design here is roundly outstanding. For every gunfight which takes place in a linear corridor for the sake of balls-to-the-wall action, there are 3 which are just as excellent as the ship graveyard from Uncharted 3, with options and tactical decisions to be made everywhere. Let's go through the island jungle combat encounter as an example, shall we? This was Naughty Dog's vertical slice, so we can assume it's one they're proud of. So Drake is hidden in some tall grass with enemies above. When they turn around, you choose to flank left and climb up, of the 3 or 4 options present. You stealth kill 2 enemies up here, then while jumping over to a different platform, a 3rd enemy spots you. From here you take cover and start shooting, but more enemies have outflanked you, so you run further forwards and jump for a grapple point, shooting as you swing and punching an enemy out as you land. You run around out of sight, and at this point you may or may not be back in stealth. If I can fault the combat for anything, it's that it's not entirely clear when enemies will lose track of you. It's not direct line of sight like The Last of Us, but they can lose you, unlike previous Uncharted's. From here it's difficult to progress with stealth, so you climb back up to the upper level of the arena and take a few guys out. You flank around and melee kill another one. You run over to some cover, take out the sniper, then slide down the mud and take out a few more before moving on. Notably, you didn't have to kill every single enemy to progress. This is a play-by-play of an entire gunfight in Uncharted 4 to give you an impression of how different it is from anything in Uncharted 1 or 2. A play-by-play of most anything in those games would be a single sentence. Just from this footage, you can see they tended towards linear gun ranges with few options and fewer reasons to stay on the move. Uncharted 4 succeeds simply by giving the player more to think about, both more to use to their advantage, like the rope swings, and more to keep them on the defensive, with the intelligently flanking enemies. The enemies surprised and impressed me by managing to shoot me dead even as I hung on to the back of the very furthest point of the dormitories map in Scotland. Many of the gunfights in Uncharted 4 feel like that final boss fight with Lazarevich from Uncharted 2. You're not always moving around quite that much, but they all involve this game of cat and mouse, where you move around because you're being chased and outflanked, only to use that movement to your advantage and turn the tables on the enemy. Which makes it odd that the grenade throwbacks from Uncharted 3 have been removed. This is the one game in the series that doesn't need to use grenades to force the player to move around, since the enemies do such a good job of flanking. I don't think the way grenades are used here makes the overall gameplay any better or worse, but that's the problem. They don't really make much difference to how you play the game at all, since you'll be moving around regardless. There's a missed opportunity to do something to make grenades relevant here. Perhaps enemies could throw grenades ahead of the player's movement, forcing you to change direction, instead of just chucking them at the spot where you've taken cover. So most battles will play out in a similar fashion to that first one, which is a good thing. Regardless of the smaller details of each arena, they'll always keep you on the move and keep you aggressive. One standout map is a circular room with enemies rappelling down on all sides and a chandelier to swing from in the middle. When you're outflanked, you can always swing to the other side and get cover. It reminds me of swimming in Uncharted 3's ship graveyard. I really enjoy these fights where there's no defined downrange area. You have to create that distance yourself. Another is the elevator battle, which is the second and last gunfight in the entire series to combine the climbing and gunplay mechanics, and it's pretty inspired. As the elevator goes up, Drake has to use it and the cliff surrounding it as cover, shooting at enemies above. This is much more open than the sign hanging bit in Among Thieves, but it still gets the player to hang for cover since there isn't anything to crouch behind. The upwards progression of the elevator also makes the fight less static than Uncharted 2's. Gotta be one of my favourite fights in the series. There's one with a tower to snipe from if you can get all the way up there quietly, and from there you can use the new enemy marking feature if you want. I like the challenge of not knowing, so I just don't use it, similar to listen mode in The Last of Us. And let's not forget that this is the Uncharted game which allows you to do something like this organically. It's not forced on you. If you don't make the connection between the grapple point and the RPG, you miss out on doing something cool, but nothing's stopping you from moving on oblivious. And if you do put 2 and 2 together, it feels awesome because you did something cool for once. You made the connection. It wasn't the game doing something cool and giving you some basic input on it. Even when battles don't have something unique like this going on, they'll still be well designed like the island jungle and use the new movement options effectively. The baseline quality of the level design here is some of the highest I've ever seen in a shooter following the Gears of War regenerating health cover-based hit-scan weapons model. I don't think that's enough to totally elevate the game since those base gameplay mechanics remain unchanged, but I've already gone over this genre's deficiencies at length in the first Uncharted video. Really, the biggest complaint is often a lack of enemies. When you build a sprawling level like this, you want to have enough enemies that the player spends more than a couple of minutes there. Sadly, I often came away feeling like a fight hadn't lasted long enough to give me a reason to learn the whole arena. It's not all complete genius. Yet again, the stealth leaves a lot to be desired. Enemies now have detection meters, which, funnily enough, were actually introduced in The Last of Us as an auditory cue instead of a visual one. In previous Uncharted, guards only had 3 states: unaware, suspicious, and attacking. That hasn't actually changed here. The visual indicator simply gives a bit of leeway between the unaware and suspicious stages as it fills up. It is appreciated that the level design allows pure stealth. The long grass makes it a viable option by giving you ample places to hide, but this still requires the constant waiting which plagued Uncharted 2 and 3 if you tried stealth in those games, and The Last of Us if you tried a pure stealth run. There is no way to influence the patrol routes of these enemies aside from chucking a grenade, which is more trouble than it's worth because it causes guards to go straight to the suspicious state. Trying pure stealth is a tedious waiting game of learning patrol routes and gaps in enemy sightlines. I said in some extra thoughts on The Last of Us, that game is best played 1/3 stealth and 2/3 combat because it's cool to explore stealth options, but the combat options are much more varied and versatile in the end. I'd say Uncharted 4 is best played more like 15% stealth and 85% combat. Give stealth a go, maybe you'll enjoy the tension of it, but don't hesitate to start shooting the moment stealth begins to bore you. When you do, you'll have a harder time appreciating the improvements in the level design if you've picked a higher difficulty. This playthrough was on hard, and I died a hell of a lot. The problem here is that this level design does everything in its power to encourage constantly being on the move and making choices, which is great. But the game still features regenerating health, which encourages you to stop somewhere out of the line of fire and wait. When Drake has such a low health pool, even if I see I'm getting flanked, popping out of cover to fall back can get me killed in a couple of seconds anyway. You die so quickly that constant movement isn't an option because it means being in the line of fire for longer than Drake can take. You can try a new angle of approach every time you die, which at least fixes the repetition complaint, but the levels are still all built with this movement in mind, while Drake's tiny health pool is best suited to a conservative approach. In Uncharted 1 and 2, the problem was that the level design was repetitive and linear. The health system was suitable, but the level design made the gameplay boring. In Uncharted 4, it's the health system which can't accommodate levels which are complex and open. The level design makes the game much more interesting, but the health system restricts the player from traversing the levels in the most interesting way. This is made worse by the other complaints I had for the previous games. Taking away some of Drake's health also takes away some of the player's mechanical options. Running and gunning and melee combat require you to expose yourself and are completely impractical. Try to melee someone on hard while another enemy is still shooting you and you'll likely be dead before Drake's melee animations even finish. This is a huge conflict of design between the mechanics and the levels. You want the player to be constantly moving around, making use of all the zigs and zags you've built in the environment, and you even want them to die from time to time so they have the opportunity to take a different approach. But your game is a third-person shooter with hit-scan weapons and regenerating health, a combination which encourages finding the safest piece of cover and only exposing yourself for a few moments intermittently. It's such a deep-rooted conflict that I don't have a specific solution to give. It requires rethinking the entire system from the ground up. These level designs are more befitting of, say, Doom 2016, where the health system itself is built around aggression and staying on the move. Even as I say that, I want to give Naughty Dog some backhanded praise for finally creating a game where the ideal difficulty mode is the one labelled normal, the one most players will pick the first time through. Since they began implementing difficulties in Uncharted 1, they've never got this right. I've explained in the past why I think the original trilogy is best played on easy for the most part. The ship graveyard was only best on hard because the water provided cover everywhere, and I went into great detail on how The Last of Us changes across difficulties, eventually settling on hard as the ideal experience. In Uncharted 4, I can finally say the ideal experience is normal. You're given enough health to move around recklessly as the level design encourages, but little enough that you'll still die from time to time. You'll still be challenged to rethink your angle of approach. It's also appreciated that the difficulty isn't just ramped up by throwing more and more heavily armoured enemies at the player, to keep them constantly pinned down waiting for their health to regenerate, like Uncharted 2 and 3 were guilty of. Aside from one subpar gunfight, this is instead done by increasing the amount of cover which enemies can destroy and giving the enemies more cover themselves, forcing the player to be aggressive and very elegantly increasing the amount of time that needs to be spent in the line of fire as the game progresses. The fact that the conflict between level design and gameplay mechanics becomes so obvious just by tweaking damage numbers though, shows just how much this genre is at odds with itself, and that it's needed some serious rethinking for a long time now. I'm glad Naughty Dog appears to be moving on. They've proven their level design prowess here and their mechanical design ability in The Last of Us. I hope they go on to apply all that expertise to a single game, hopefully Last of Us 2, which at the time of writing was just announced yesterday. The level design in the first Last of Us was fine. It gave the mechanics the room they needed to shine, but I have faith Naughty Dog can find a way to have the level design play a larger role next time. It'll probably seem obvious in hindsight. There's been nothing added to the actual act of shooting a gun between Uncharted 1 and here. It's still hit scan, it still travels in a straight line, there's still no way to affect it once you've pressed the trigger. I didn't expect this to change, but I do want to go into detail on exactly how Naughty Dog have made this feel so much better in the 8 years since the first game. Bear in mind that none of what I'm about to explain makes the overall gameplay measurably better, but I've not yet seen anyone break down exactly how guns work in Uncharted 4, and I wanted to give it some attention because I think it's close to brilliant. I've said before, I think the sound effects are suitable and effective. There's a solid pap when firing a gun, but it doesn't drown out the rest of the sound mix. The PS4's rumble motors are also much improved, but that's not exactly something I can demonstrate. What's really interesting about the feel of the shooting is how the reticle works. So in the center of the screen you have this circle. I believe this is an indicator of your auto-aim bullet magnetism. Have any part of an enemy inside here and you will hit them. They don't need to be exactly in the center. Once you fire though, this circle is greyed out and becomes irrelevant. What matters now is the dot, which now represents your aim and recoil. It's smaller than the circle, so you need to be more accurate with subsequent shots. This dot will jump around with every shot you make in quick succession, so you need to be following this and compensating for the recoil. What's awesome about this is it takes away the usual uncertainty of recoil. In most games the aiming circle just expands outwards, showing you're getting less accurate. Instead, Uncharted 4 gives you an absolute pinpoint accurate aiming dot and challenges you to keep track of it as the gun recoils and it jumps upwards. Instead of forcing you to be less accurate, the game allows a skilled player to be more accurate as long as they can compensate for the recoil. I dislike weapon sway when aiming because it can introduce randomness, but I like recoil like this because it's a consequence for firing, which can then be adjusted for. You could always wait for your aim to settle back down before firing again. That's probably what you're doing when aiming for headshots, and you know the recoil will always jump upwards, so there is some opportunity to compensate. This is muddled a little when the aiming circle is also used to designate accuracy. The circle on the Aegis 9mm is larger than that of the .45 caliber, but this isn't a larger bullet magnetism area. This is trying to show that the gun is less accurate, the area where the bullet could go, as in most other shooters. I'm really not sure what effect this has on the bullet magnetism area, if it artificially forces inaccuracy or what. These reticles don't follow one universal rule, muddling up this otherwise brilliant system. Still, in the heat of battle, when you aren't thinking about minutia, this system feels very good to use, and is enhanced by the addition of hit markers, which were introduced in The Last of Us. These aren't as impressive as a satisfying hit animation, but they are a simple way to convey important information, whether the player is hitting their target or not. I've been hoping the series would add these in since Among Thieves, since guns felt terrible to me in Uncharted 1. The simple addition of hit markers adds just a little extra crunch. It's clever to have distinct icons for body shots, headshots, and shots which hit armor, and the final blow will have a red hit marker to quickly tell the player to move on to another enemy. This is taken right out of Max Payne 3. If Uncharted 4 and the Order 1886 contribute nothing else to the future of video games, they have at least provided a new standard for gun feel in third-person shooters. Seriously, the Order was boring as hell, but if you ever find yourself doing polish effects for a shooter, it's a must-play. As I said right at the beginning though, Uncharted 4's focus is squarely on the adventure, the exploration, and it often feels like it's only a shooter begrudgingly, as if, again, it's sticking to series tradition. Of the 15 hours spent playing Uncharted 4, you'll spend perhaps 3.5 hours in combat, and because it's so spread thin, it can feel more like 2. There's evidence that Naughty Dog are rightly proud of what little combat is in the game, as there's a new encounter select menu where you can just play through the individual gunfights, but it's fair to say Uncharted 4 creates one of the most refined iterations of third-person shooting with cover I've ever played, and then seems utterly disinterested in being a cover shooter. It's a problem that extends to the set pieces, which are also spread very thin throughout the game, at odds with the rest of the series. Okay, so the convoy chase in the middle of the game is probably the best one in the series. Even though it's still incredibly scripted, it gives enough choices that it feels spontaneous. All those choices end up in the same place, but a first-time player doesn't know that. Where previous games tried to hide the scripting with clever level design and signposting, Uncharted 4 hides the scripting by giving you multiple, slightly different scripts. Do you go down this street or this one? Do you jump between enemy vehicles or grapple onto the back of the truck ahead of you? This still isn't really a goal I'd consider worthwhile, but it's definitely enjoyable in the moment, which is all these games have ever tried to be. So this set piece is the most fun I had while playing Uncharted 4. In fact, I've booted the game up a number of times over the last 6 months just to play through it again. The problem is that nothing even close to this ever happens again. There are a couple of moments which are just as visually impressive, but neither involve combat, just running and jumping, which are much thinner mechanics. This is where Uncharted 4 makes sacrifices for the sake of story. This set piece is supposed to stand out as this absolutely ridiculous adrenaline rush for the sake of a character moment. And it's a development which I admit I really like. I won't offer critique on the story, but I'll say I think the cutscene following the set piece is the best one Naughty Dog has ever crafted. The problem is, if this set piece was the most enjoyable piece of gameplay in the whole of Uncharted 4, the game should be aiming to be this enjoyable to play all the time. Having one moment of gameplay which stands out as much more enjoyable than the rest of the game for the sake of plot is putting story way before gameplay. It highlights just how much less interesting the entire rest of the game is. I want to repeat, I really do like how this feeds into the story, but I'd have preferred to play a thoroughly great game than a mediocre game which lets the plot dictate when it gets to be a great one. I suppose if I were making a game with similar ideals to Uncharted, I'd be going for the dynamic set pieces over the emotional resonance. The same goes for the lack of combat. I'd say there's plenty of it here if this Uncharted had the same runtime as Among Thieves, but spreading it thin across 15 hours leaves large sections of the game where your most complex interaction will be a rope swing or a gravel slide. It gives the game a slower, more subdued pace. I hate to speculate too much, but considering the plot is also more subdued than the previous 3 games, I'll presume this isn't an accident. Uncharted 4 has less combat because the action isn't the point anymore. It's about the plot and character relationships. It's like if Uncharted 3's priorities were flipped. The cutscenes, dialogue, and emotional engagement are now the focus, and the action is supplementary. The way I see it, Uncharted 4 can be restructured so it sacrifices much less in gameplay for the sake of story without even adding anything, only taking away. I am about to argue the game should be shorter. Hear me out. I'd move the boat set piece from the prologue to the point in the story where it actually takes place. It's placed at the start to grab the player's attention, but also because it's too action heavy to fit the very down tone of the part of the game where it takes place chronologically. We're going to disregard that in favour of gameplay and say that if this were extended a bit, the game would now have 2 set pieces on the level of the convoy chase. If the game has to start with some action, make it the fight in the prison. Uncharted 3 started with a fist fight and wasn't worse for it. Second, I'd sum up the opening chapter with 10-year-old Drake in a flashback cutscene. This is a bunch of meaningless climbing and a grapple tutorial, but the next chapter is also this with only a little extra complexity. The opening chapter is totally unnecessary. The game can then have its slow, story-based opening chapters for the sake of plot. The real game introduces itself 4 times, at least this hypothetical version would only do it twice. After this, chapters 6 and 7 could be consolidated since the prison guard tower chapter would now be the climbing tutorial and the prison break is still the gunplay one. We only need a stealth tutorial at this point. The shooting, and especially the entire chapter of climbing, could be cut down. And that's it, nothing else needs to change. I might have cut down the island exploration chapter and the second scene with young Drake, but these come after action heavy moments when the game has earned a lull in the pacing. After the auction heist, I think the rest of the game paces itself very well. Gunfights still aren't as frequent as in previous games, but previous games didn't have the extra effort behind the climbing sections. It's because Uncharted 4 introduces itself 4 times and simplifies one of only 2 big set pieces so it can be placed right at the very beginning that it feels so sluggish. Simply making the game shorter would increase the percentage of the game spent in combat and cut out some of the least interesting climbing. Of the first 6 chapters, 3 are spent on the lowest effort climbing in the game, 2 are spent walking around, and only 1 is spent in combat, in the most linear shooting galleries the game has. As I discussed at the end of the exploration section, the walking can stay, but the climbing needs to go. Look, it's easy to get caught up in picking through a game's individual components, but it has to be remembered at times that all the elements have to come together as a whole package. A single part of a game can't just be good in a vacuum if the player will also spend time doing something else. I complained a lot about the gameplay of Uncharted feeling like filler in the first video. Here, finally, combat doesn't feel like filler, it feels substantial and well designed. But if you make me play through a bunch of padding, the climbing, to get to it, I'll remember the padding and being bored for the lion's share of my time. Remove the padding and I've got no option but to remember the good stuff. There should never be this reliance on players forming their opinion from a game's high points instead of the sum total of their gameplay experience. I don't think anyone was expecting Uncharted 4 to be as long as The Last of Us, but now that it is, I think Naughty Dog have really shot themselves in the foot. Next time, anything less will seem unsatisfying, further encouraging the developer to pad their games. So that's combat. The level design is genuinely outstanding, so much that it's at odds with the bog standard gameplay mechanics. The stealth additions don't do enough to make stealth any less boring, but the guns feel fantastic. There just aren't enough opportunities to use them in this 15-hour game. Finally, puzzles. I've already gone over the traversal ones, but Uncharted 4 also has a handful of separate problem-solving activities of the kind you'd find in a 3D Prince of Persia game. One in particular is perhaps too similar to be a coincidence. I don't have much to say about these except to praise them for all actually being puzzles. Aside from maybe the one in the clock tower, the player is never spoon-fed the answers through the journal this time. Even when the journal is used, the player still has to make some connections for themselves. For example, in the caves towards the end of the game, Drake has to navigate some explosive flooring. The player is given a guide, but it's not the answer. All the sigils are rotated, meaning there's a step here involving the player's own thought process outside of the game itself. The game is relying on you to have a functioning brain in your head, and has the unbelievable balls to stop your progress until you use it. All the large-scale puzzles in the game are like this. They introduce a concept and then twist it. The pirate portrait puzzle starts taking away information, leaving only the bare essentials needed to solve it, and the Prince of Persia symbol rotator introduces symbols which rotate on their own in the final step. Whether you enjoy puzzles like these or not, it's mind-blowing that Naughty Dog are actually expecting some display of intelligence this time. Again, Uncharted 4 feels like it makes a massive improvement because the previous game set such a low bar. The final section was stories, so for those who've not seen any of my videos before, I've had my bitch and moan about story in these games in the first Uncharted video. All that holds true here, but I've got nothing to add to it. If you need my opinion, I enjoyed Uncharted 4's story a lot when divorced from gameplay, but that's not a perspective I'm interested in exploring this time. Uncharted 4 is another passable game which I've probably made sound better than it is. It's the best game you could reasonably expect to come from the Uncharted formula, which still isn't saying much. I think there are genuine lessons to be learned from it. You could teach a class on the exemplary level design and how it's completely wasted on a contradictory combat system. The gun feel is absolutely fantastic and a new standard for the genre, even though that doesn't mean much to the overall quality of gameplay. The exploration, while still simple, shows a glimmer of brilliance from time to time, and rewarding exploration with unique morsels of gameplay is a lesson the Legend of Zelda series in particular could really learn something from. Uncharted 4 is the one story-first, plot-driven, gameplay-light, cinematic experience I'd say is worth playing. Was it worth the last 8 years to get there? Probably not, no. And with that, this series of videos on Naughty Dog's games is at an end. If you've watched them all, or even just to the end of this one, thank you for joining me, and I sincerely hope it was worth your time. At the time of writing, 3 Naughty Dog related products were announced at last week's PlayStation Experience 2016, The Last of Us Part 2, Uncharted Lost Legacy, and the Crash Bandicoot remakes. There will be a small video on the Uncharted DLC chapter if I feel there's anything interesting gameplay-wise to say about it. The teaser trailer didn't suggest that there will be. I'll decide whether to do a video on the Crash remakes after I've played them, and as for The Last of Us 2, well, it's probably 3 years away. No sense making any promises just yet. Again, thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. I promise the next thing won't be 13 videos long.